Hello, dear friends. Welcome back to another episode of the English Learning Podcast brought to you by English Finders. I'm Emilia, and today I'm joined by my new co-host, Laim. For those who don't know who Laim is my good friend. Hello, Laim, welcome to the show. How is going everything?
Hello, Emilia. I'm doing great, and I'm really excited to host this podcast along with you. Thank you so much for having me on the show as your co-host.
Great. Today, we're diving into a skill that can really take your English fluency to the next level: how to think in English faster. We know that many of you are working hard to improve your English, and thinking directly in the language is a game changer.
That's right, Emilia. When you start thinking in English, you'll notice a big difference in how quickly and naturally you can speak. But it's not always easy, especially if you're used to translating from your native language. So, in today's episode, we're going to share some practical tips and strategies to help you speed up your thinking process in English.
Okay, let's jump right into today's topic: how to think in English faster. Laim, why is thinking in English such an important skill for learners to develop?
Great question, Emilia. Thinking in English is crucial because it helps you speak more fluently and naturally. When you're able to think directly in English, you're not pausing to translate from your native language. This makes your speech flow more smoothly, and you can respond quicker in conversations.
Exactly. And I think a lot of learners don't realize that thinking in English isn't just about speaking. It's about how you process information, how you approach problem solving, and even how you express emotions. When you think in English, you're immersing yourself in the language, which accelerates your learning.
That's right, and it's not something that happens overnight. It takes practice and a bit of patience. But once you start, even with small steps, you'll notice improvements. One effective way to start is by immersing yourself in English as much as possible. This could mean watching TV shows or movies in English, listening to English podcasts, or even changing your phone's language settings to English.
Those are great tips. Another approach is to start with simple thoughts in English. For example, when you're doing something routine like making breakfast, try to think in English about what you're doing. I'm cracking the eggs, I'm toasting the bread. Start with these simple thoughts, and gradually, you can move on to more complex ideas.
Yes, and as you get more comfortable, try to describe your day or plan your activities in English. You could even journal in English, writing down your thoughts and feelings at the end of the day. The key is to practice consistently. The more you do it, the faster your brain will get at thinking in English.
And don't worry if it feels slow or awkward at first. That's totally normal. One thing that really helps is building up your vocabulary. The more words and phrases you know, the easier it is to think in English. It's like having a toolbox. You need the right tools to build something, and vocabulary is your tool set for thinking and speaking in English.
That's a great point. And speaking of vocabulary, it's also important to focus on phrases, not just individual words. Thinking in phrases like "I need to" or "how about we" helps you form sentences more quickly without getting stuck on each word. This approach is closer to how native speakers think.
Absolutely. Another technique is to practice mindfulness. Be aware of when you're slipping back into your native language and gently steer yourself back to thinking in English. It's about training your brain to stay in English mode as much as possible.
And remember, it's okay to make mistakes. Sometimes you might find yourself stuck or reverting to your native language, and that's fine. The goal is progress, not perfection. Over time, those moments will become fewer as your ability to think in English strengthens.
Exactly. To sum up, start small, build your vocabulary, focus on phrases, immerse yourself in English, and be mindful of your thoughts. With consistent practice, thinking in English will become second nature, and you'll notice a significant improvement in your fluency.
And we're here to help you along the way. Now, let's move on to our next segment, where we'll show you how these tips can be applied in real-life conversations.
Exactly, Liam. Let's see how these tips play out in a real-life conversation. In this segment, we'll listen in on a dialogue between two friends, Sophie and Lucas, as they talk about their experiences trying to think in English.
Pay attention to how they use the tips we've shared, like focusing on phrases, using their vocabulary, and immersing themselves in English. Let's get started.
Hey, Lucas. How's it going?
Hey, Sophie. I'm doing well. Just trying to improve my English, I've been working on thinking in English, but it's been challenging.
I know exactly what you mean. I've been trying to do that too, especially when I'm at work. It's tough, but I've noticed that it really helps with my speaking.
Yeah, I've heard that thinking in English can make you more fluent. How do you do it? I keep catching myself translating from my native language.
That used to happen to me a lot too. What's been working for me is starting with simple things. Like when I'm making my morning coffee, I think I'm pouring the water, I'm stirring the coffee. It sounds basic, but it's a good way to get your brain used to English.
That's a good idea. I usually try to think in English when I'm driving. I'll describe what I'm doing or what I see, like, I'm turning left, or the light is red. It helps, but sometimes I still find myself thinking in my native language.
That's totally normal. Another thing that helps me is watching TV shows in English. I try to follow along without subtitles and imagine how I would say things in English if I were one of the characters.
Interesting. I've been watching shows in English too, but I usually have the subtitles on. Maybe I should try turning them off to challenge myself more.
Definitely give it a try. And if you get stuck, don't stress about it. Just pause and think about how you would say it in English, then keep going. It's like training your brain to stay in English mode.
Yeah, that makes sense. I've also started keeping a little notebook with me. Whenever I think of something in my native language, I write it down and then figure out how to say it in English later.
That's a great strategy. I've done that too. And it's really helpful for building your vocabulary. The more words and phrases you know, the easier it gets to think in English without translating.
Exactly. And I've noticed that when I focus on common phrases, I don't have to think so much about how to structure my sentences. It just comes out naturally.
That's the goal. This takes time, but the more you practice, the quicker you'll get. And don't be afraid to make mistakes. These are parts of the learning process.
Thanks, Sophie. I'll keep at it. It's good to know I'm not the only one struggling with this.
Definitely not. We're all in this together. Just remember, every little bit of practice helps.
Absolutely. Thanks for the tips, Sophie. I'll try to think more in English throughout the day.
No problem, Lucas. We've got this.
That was a great conversation between Sophie and Lucas. You could really hear how they're applying the tips we discussed earlier, like thinking in simple terms and immersing themselves in English through daily activities.
Exactly. And it's important to remember that it's okay to struggle or make mistakes. What matters is that you keep practicing. Over time, thinking in English will become more natural, just like it did for Sophie and Lucas.
Now that we've heard how Sophie and Lucas are working on thinking in English faster, let's dive into some key vocabulary that can help you do the same.
These 5 words and phrases are not only useful in everyday conversations, but they can also help you think more quickly and naturally in English. We'll explain each word, give you a definition, and provide an example of how to use it in a sentence.
Let's start with the word routine. A routine is a regular way of doing something, usually in the same order and at the same time each day.
For example, you might say, my morning routine includes brushing my teeth, having breakfast, and reading the news. Using the word routine helps you describe regular activities you think about in English.
Next up is the word immerse. To immerse yourself in something means to become fully involved or engaged in it.
For example, I immerse myself in English by watching movies, reading books, and speaking with friends. This word is great for describing how you can surround yourself with English to improve your thinking and speaking skills.
Another important word is phrase. A phrase is a group of words that work together to express a particular idea, often used as a single unit in a sentence.
For example, the phrase "how about we" is useful when suggesting something to someone. Learning phrases instead of just individual words helps you think and speak faster in English because you're using ready-made chunks of language.
Now, let's talk about the word translate. To translate means to change words or text from one language into another.
For example, I try not to translate from my native language to English because it slows down my thinking. Understanding this word helps you be mindful of when you're translating instead of thinking directly in English.
Lastly, we have the word mindful. To be mindful means to be aware of something and to pay careful attention to it.
For example, I'm mindful of my thoughts and try to keep them in English as much as possible. Being mindful of your language habits is key to improving your ability to think in English.
Those are our 5 key vocabulary words: routine, immerse, phrase, translate, and mindful. Try to incorporate these words into your daily thinking and speaking practice. The more familiar you become with these words, the easier it will be to think in English.
Exactly. And as you use these words more often, you'll start noticing that your thoughts naturally form in English, helping you to think faster and more fluently.
As we wrap up today's episode on how to think in English faster, let's quickly review what we've covered.
Sure. We discussed the importance of thinking in English and how it can enhance your fluency. We shared practical tips, like immersing yourself in English, starting with simple thoughts, and practicing mindfulness to stay in English mode.
We also listened to a real-life dialogue between Sophie and Lucas, where they talked about their own experiences and strategies for thinking in English. It's great to see how these tips can be applied in everyday conversations.
And don't forget the 5 key vocabulary words we covered. Using these words and their meanings will help you communicate more effectively and think in English more naturally.
To put it all together, remember that improving your ability to think in English takes time and practice. Start small, be consistent, and don't be afraid to make mistakes along the way. Each step you take brings you closer to fluency.
Exactly. Keep challenging yourself and find ways to incorporate English into your daily life. Whether it's through watching shows, describing your activities, or simply practicing mindfulness, every bit of effort counts.
Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of the English Learning Podcast. We hope you found today's discussion helpful and that you're feeling inspired to keep practicing.
Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell notification. Share your thoughts and experiences with us. We'd love to hear how you're applying these tips.
Join us next time as we continue exploring more ways to enhance your English skills. Until then, keep practicing and stay motivated.
Thanks for listening, and have a great day.